Sean Doyle sighed as he sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by stacks of cardboard boxes and yellowed papers that documented his recently deceased father's life. Alvin J. Doyle had been a respected journalist, always seeking truth and unafraid to ask the difficult questions. Now it fell to Sean to sort through the remnants of that vibrant life, to determine what pieces of his father's legacy were worth preserving. "Found anything interesting?" asked his wife Diane, emerging from the attic ladder. Her presence was a welcome anchor amidst the hurricane of memories threatening to sweep Sean away. "A few things," Sean replied distractedly, his attention fixed on a typewritten letter paperclipped to an old newspaper clipping. The headline blared, "Iwo Jima Marine makes false report of Allied victory in Europe," above bold black censor marks from the War Department and U.S. Navy. Diane peered over his shoulder. "What's that about?" Apparently back in '45, some bored Marines played a prank over the radio announcing Germany had surrendered. It spread like wildfire before they realized it was fake. "Sounds like Dad wrote an article about it that got censored." Sean pointed to a handwritten note from his father. "See Iwo Jima, Legacy of Valor by Bill D. Ross, pages 327-8. The letter itself was from a John H. Macon, identified as a PFC Marine stationed on Iwo Jima at the time of the incident. His hometown was listed as Lolita, Texas. The final line jumped out at Sean. "Did anyone ever find out who did it?" Diane squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "Quite the mystery. Your dad always did love chasing a good story. I'll leave you to it. Holler if you need anything." Sean nodded absently, already flipping through the dog-eared copy of Legacy of Valor retrieved from his father's library. There on page 328 he found it. "The identity of the Marine culprit who caused it all remains one of Iwo's lost secrets." An idea began to take shape in Sean's mind. It was a trivial thing, sure, but his father had cared enough to write about it. And this former Marine, Macon, had reached out hoping for closure, for an answer to that lingering question mark. Maybe Sean could pick up where his father left off, could track down that last missing puzzle piece to honor them both. He booted up his father's old desktop computer, the dial-up modem screeching in protest, and began his search. The letter itself had no date, but the lack of a zip code or state abbreviation suggested mid-60s at the latest. On a whim, Sean plugged Macon's name into an online white pages directory. Bingo! A listing popped up for a John H. Macon Jr. right there in Lolita, TX. Heart pounding, Sean reached for his cell phone and dialed the number. "Hello," a gruff male voice answered after a few rings. "Hi, is this John Macon?" "Depends. Who's asking?" The voice was guarded, almost suspicious. Sean took a deep breath. "My name is Sean Doyle. My father, Alvin Doyle, was a war correspondent in World War II. He recently passed away, and I found a letter addressed to him from a John H. Macon about an incident on Iwo Jima in March '45. I'm trying to follow up." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then slowly, warily, "Sean John Macon, who served on Iwo Jima, was my daddy. He died about 25 years back. I'm John Jr., what's this about?" Haltingly at first, then picking up steam, Sean relayed the whole story. The mysterious letter, the censored article, his father's scribbled notes. "So I guess I'm trying to solve the mystery. Find out who that prankster Marine was who started the fake news about the German surrender." Another weighted silence. Then finally, Macon spoke. "Sean, you got some time? I think I might be able to help shed some light. Maybe give this thing the ending it deserves. It's a story my daddy told me, and I ain't never forgot it." The confession. John Macon Jr. cleared his throat and began. "My daddy didn't talk much about the war when I was growing up. I think there was a part of him that never really left that Sulphur Island, you know? It haunted him. All those good boys blown to bits. For they ever got the chance to really live." Sean made a sympathetic noise. He had heard similar sentiments from his own father over the years. "Anyway, it was 1965, I reckon. We were sitting in the living room watching What's My Line reruns. Remember that show? With the celebrity mystery guests in the blindfolds." "Sure," Sean replied. "My parents loved it." "Right. So on this episode, Art Carney was the guest. And after they'd guessed him and took off the mask, he starts going into these old radio routines he used to do overseas during the war, imitating all the bigwigs: FDR, Churchill, Stalin. Sean was momentarily confused by the apparent non sequitur but stayed silent, letting the man unspool his tale at his own pace. Well, something about that set my daddy off. He'd been drinking, which he did more and more those days, and I'd heard him get riled up before, ranting about this or that, but never like this. He gets this wild look in his eye and he jumps up and starts pacing, waving his arms around. And then he starts bellowing in this booming announcer voice. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you an important news bulletin. The German High Command has officially agreed to an unconditional surrender. The war in Europe is over. Sean felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The words were eerily similar to the ones in his father's article. Macon continued, his own voice cracking with emotion. He just kept going on like that, making up all these crazy reports. But then suddenly he stops and sags back into his chair and starts weeping big, gut-wrenching sobs like I ain't never heard from him before. When he finally caught his breath, he grabbed me by the shoulders and said, Johnny, there's something I gotta get off my chest, for I go to my grave. Something I done that I ain't never told nobody. Sean gripped the phone tighter, scarcely daring to breathe. He said, Son, I'm the one that did it. The fake radio report that night on Iwo. It was me. The revelation. Sean sank back against a stack of boxes, head reeling at the sudden revelation. He confessed? Just like that, out of nowhere. Son, when you spend most of your adult life with a regret like that burning a hole in your soul, sometimes the bottle is the only way to dull the ache, till something brings it all rushing back. Sean swallowed hard, chilled by the parallel to his father's own struggles with alcohol later in life. How many untold stories had he drowned in scotch over the decades? Diane's voice floated up from downstairs. San? The meatloaf is ready. You coming? He shook himself. Be right there, Han. Then, turning back to the phone, Listen, John, I can't thank you enough for sharing this with me. You've given me the missing piece, given both our fathers some closure. Well, I reckon they're both up there somewhere having a good laugh about it now. Macon's laugh was tinged with melancholy. You take care, Sean. Sean ended the call and sat for a long moment, surrounded by the remnants of his father's life's work, feeling suddenly very young and yet very old at the same time. Then he gathered up the letter, article, and his meticulous notes and slipped them into a folder labeled Alvin Doyle's Last Story. He would find a way to write it up, to put all the pieces together into a proper memorial to his dad and to PFC John H. Macon, USMC. The story that had begun on a tiny speck of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific, then spanned generations and state lines in search of an answer, would finally have an ending. Or perhaps it was a beginning, a reminder to keep seeking truth, to never stop asking questions, even of the past. Sean switched off the attic light and descended the ladder to join his family for dinner, and to contemplate how to best carry forward his father's legacy armed with this new knowledge. Maybe, just maybe, he would even write a story of his own. Mystery solved, indeed.